using the last of the bits from the freezer and making pies for the fete on Saturday. I've a confession to make. I use ready-made pastry. I've done shortcrust myself for the mince pies, but puff and phyllo are just too fiddly. Mrs. Whitton at the Maisonettes would be horrified. She's quite the chef, I think. A good plain home cook is what she'd say, of course. Funny how we came to meet, really. It was when Robert was first under the weather, and I went to get the shopping. It's downhill on the way out, but a good steep climb back to ours, so I stopped for a few minutes on the bench behind the bus stop. It backs on to her place. Not that I needed the rest, really. I'm quite fit, but gave me an extra 10 minutes outside. If Robert had been willing for me to have driving lessons, things would have worked out so differently. Anyway, I heard this voice from behind me asking me if I was all right. Turns out Mrs. Whitton was a voice from above. She's on the first floor and was watering her hanging baskets. I immediately felt guilty and slightly panicky. Robert was expecting me straight back, not least because I'd collected his prescription, but he is a stickler for routine. He usually does the shopping on his way back from work, and from what he says, I know his route around the aisles is methodical, and he always brings the same items. When I realised where the voice was coming from, I was glad I was shielded by the monkey puzzle tree at number 12, or Robert might have been able to see. Our bedroom is at the front, and has a view of the whole crescent. No, nothing wrong, I said. Just taking a moment, thinking that would be that. But no, Mrs. Whitton introduced herself, and within minutes, leaning over a balcony, she told me that she'd moved in 2 years before and she thought she knew all the neighbours, so I must be new. And would I like a coffee sometime? She's a hard woman to ignore. She's a few years older than me. She's got rather a jolly face, a bit ruddy, as if she spent a lot of time outdoors. I must say, there's something rather captivating about her eyes. People with really blue eyes are rather few and far between, aren't they? Hers draw you in. What happened was Robert needed longer to recover, so my visits were becoming a regular thing, and my chats with Mrs. Whitton. Turns out she's a widow. Her husband Michael fell off a cruise ship. It was their 40th wedding anniversary trip. She had to downsize after that. I presume she didn't have insurance. I had to tell Robert all manner of excuses for being late. Queues at the checkout were wearing a bit thin, but he wasn't at all his usual self, so I was spared the interrogation and painstaking evaluation over my approach to the shopping. He'd asked for his binoculars, but I'd said I couldn't find them. The doctor said he wasn't to overexert himself or he might end up in hospital. But I put them in the garage, behind the old camping stove, just in case he came downstairs. Mrs. Whitton, in a moment that overstepped the mark a bit, asked if I'd ever thought of moving on. Leaving Robert is what she meant. I thought she'd use some of what I'd said in conversation to trap me, so I had to backpedal. Robert was a good provider. We had a nice home, mortgage almost paid up. Yes, he could be a bit particular, but it wasn't as if he was violent or aggressive. Mrs. Whitton asked if I'd heard of passive-aggressive. Look it up on Google, she suggested. I don't have access to the internet, and I don't need a mobile phone. I mean, who would I call? I didn't tell her that. But she did do more than hint that she was happier without Michael. He'd been a control freak. She said she was sorry if she was poking her nose in, but she recognised the signs and that I should come to her if ever things got too much for me to bear. Amanda, she said, there's more to life than a routine dictated by Robert. I knew she meant business when she used my first name, so I reassured her I had it all in hand. I'm moving to the coast. The removal men came on Tuesday. Robert left me for someone younger and prettier, but had the decency to leave me the house. Mrs. Whitton has put her place on the market too. She's hired a van to help take some of my stuff to the tip. No point cluttering up my new life with old tat. She's been a godsend. Those binoculars can be chucked and the freezer is going. Some of Robert's old clothes are going to the charity shop. I said to Mrs. Whitton that his new woman must have had more than a say than I did. She must have suggested a whole new wardrobe. Mrs. Whitton's blue eyes were very piercing. I think she can read into my very soul. But if she knows, she doesn't judge. I must finish my pies, as they will be judged. Wish me luck.